Welcome to $1 Billion Clown Farm. Today we're going to be painting Chaos Knights now that the hype is completely over.
I started making this video so long ago, but I actually don't have footage of a lot of the assembly anymore because I accidentally deleted it 6 months ago. But one thing that was really helpful was sprue goo. That was a tip from my friend Patrick in the background of the previous shot. So sprue goo is just the mix of sprue and goo. It's sprue that you leave inside of plastic for a long time and it melts and it turns into this thing that's really nice for sealing gaps in the model. You can see the effect on the camera right side of his, it rotated. You can see it on, actually still on camera right leg joint, the little socket, there's like a line going through it. I've used sprue goo and plastic glue to blend it together to make that seem a lot less noticeable. Here's me gesturing towards that line in July without knowing that I've already explained what sprue goo is in the preceding part of the video. Yeah, assembly is definitely what took the longest on these guys. It was really fun at first, but then kind of a discouraging grind towards the end of just trying to get the last few details on there because I was tackling the whole army at once instead of just going like model by model as one typically might. They're also fully magnetized in a way that is honestly probably excessive and was a huge pain to get done. Note to other people who might attempt this, I realized I really didn't need to magnetize the torso to the legs. It makes it hard to keep them in like a pose I like because they get bumped into all the time and look kind of goofy. I'm keeping them that way for now just because I put so much work in and it feels sad to glue it over, but I really don't feel like knights have to be magnetized at the torso. I thought it'd be cool for posability, but it was kind of a waste. I use these plastic sand needles at the end to try and make the sprue goo areas even smoother. I wanted to use these because I've never used them before and novelty is the primary motivational factor in my life. Just make sure the sprue goo is dry for at least 12 to 24 hours first. It might seem dry on the surface, but it usually takes longer than that to actually be dry all the way through. The kit bashing for these guys was done over such a long period of time and is so extensive that it's really hard for me to pinpoint everything, but I can try and go over some of the more common things that I used over and over again. These jewelry chains are from Michaels. You can get them from like almost any craft or jewelry store. Be careful with magnets when you're using them. To keep them in place at the end, I apply super glue extra thin between every single one of the links to stop them from moving around so much. It makes them blend in with the rest of the model. I find it personally kind of unimmersive to see them wobbling constantly. These little resin skulls are from a company I told myself I'd stop plugging because they kind of suck. You can use resin skulls from anywhere. At this point, I would probably just 3D print them, but yeah, not gonna drop that source. Just make your own skulls. It's not that hard. Get some green stuff and some skulls. The gears I got from a jewelry store, there's tons of online sellers that have gears just like this too. I think Amazon even has some. They're just like gears for jewelry and steampunk cosplay stuff. I wanted to give these guys a Dark Mechanicus feel, and I'll probably use a Dark Mechanicus household for narrative reasons. All the icons you see, like the Chaos Shield that's currently at a really distracting angle, are magnetized so that I can swap out what god he belongs to, which is honestly more for sick flavor than it is for mechanics. It's like not necessary from a gameplay perspective, but I thought it'd be awesome. I made candles by taking a tube of plastic card and just cutting it into tiny little pieces that you can't see because my big left hand is in them. Ultimately, I do most of the candles just by printing them for time's sake primarily. I actually like how these ones turned out more. I think they have a cool feel to them, but yeah, it just wasn't feasible. So because they're plastic, the plastic glue, putting it on top actually melts them a little bit and creates these drops which look like melted wax. I made a bunch of them, stuck them in place, let them dry, and then I used green stuff to make the flames after, and that was glued separately. This is me applying the ultra thin glue. As you can see, the chain like becomes pretty stiff. You have to be careful not to gunk up the chains too much because if you put it out too fast, you will be able to see it between the holes in the chain link, but if you do it slow and careful, it should be okay. You can use like a paper clip or something to spread it around after. After priming everything black, I airbrushed a bunch of brown tones on top and matte varnished them, and after that I applied some chipping medium, which you can see me doing now. So if you've never used chipping medium before, all it does is create a layer that after you put paint on after, you can then brush off with water and it'll show the paint underneath. So I'm going to paint him black and off-white and then chip that away to have the brown underneath so it'll look weathered. I used a pretty close to even mix of Wraithbone and Dust Bowl by the Duncan Rose Tooth and Coats paint line to base coat him. I started off really bright and the intention was always to start bright and work my way down to a darker tone later through weathering, but I think for the next night I want to keep them a little bit brighter. This night ended up basically black. The white was mostly chipped away, as you'll see later, and I think it's a cool look, but I think for variety, having some of the knights with black shoulder pads and some with white is going to look great. I slowly added more and more Wraithbone into the mix until it became basically pure Wraithbone at the brightest spots. And then I shaded all of the edges, just basically outlining it with this Vallejo dark brown acrylic wash, which is great because it's acrylic metallic and not enamels, which means it takes like a quarter year off my life instead of 3 every time I spray it. I followed this up with Vallejo Orange Wash. It's the same thing as their dark brown one, just orange instead. This is the name, I guess, implies. And after warming him up with those nice Blanchitsu tones, I took any areas that I wanted to make a lot darker and added black, just outlining the same exact process, but black this time. I followed up the Berserker Red Undercoat with some Sanguine Scarlet. I think it's the next like brightest red in their line. They have like a whole color chart of like base highlight and extreme highlight. For the metallics, pretty standard thing I do in a lot of videos. I dry brush Vallejo Bronze over as a base. This is eventually going to be followed up with dry brushing silver on top, but before I did that, I decided I wanted to weather and get some of that paint off of there in order to show the dark undertone, because I wanted the silver to show up on there too. So now when I dry brush it, the silver will like bleed over a little bit, and I don't have to worry about it being removed too much when I like chip it later. Another part of why I'm doing this is because I want to put on decals soon, and I want the decals to look chipped and weathered too. So this way I won't have to weather the model and then weather the decals after. I can just do all that weathering and chipping all at once. My process for applying decals is pretty standard. I usually apply either gloss varnish or decal fixer first. The decal fixer Vallejo makes the one I use. There's probably other companies. They all probably do the same thing. It's all just branding. The world is all just branding. And then after the decals are on there, I apply Microsol, another fun brand. Oh my god, I spilled so much of it. Yeah, apparently just use your base as a palette and use that to spread the Microsol over your decals after they're on there. Jesus Christ, what an animal. How do I live like this, dude? And after that's all nice and dry, you just put some matte varnish on there and it makes them look like they're painted on. It's great. It's not that hard. It's great. Okay, now we're ready to apply the silver. That's all out of the way. I think I start off just by dry brushing a little bit on any of the bronze parts that I want to be more silver instead. So by leaving some of our bronze underneath the silver, it creates layers that look a lot more interesting than if you were to just put one or the other on top. And it has like a warm undertone and a little bit of variety that looks nice from far away. For all the areas that I wanted to look more gold instead of silver, I put this Balthasar gold on top. I also use some dark brown to carefully draw cracks and little lines going through the decals so they look less like they're just slapped on there. And I tried to paint them most of the time to match the contours of our chipping underneath. I watered this down pretty heavily to make the narrow lines, and then I used a lot less water for anywhere I wanted to have some like splatter and texture that you could see. One of my favorite tools for chipping is foam. They don't make blister packs with a little foam inside anymore, or at least GW doesn't. So this is a lot harder to come by than it used to be, but they're still around. Like any foam, pluck foam works, and you can just treat it like a brush, wash it after if you want to keep reusing it. My new favorite paint that feels very toxic and not super great for you long term is Dirty Down Rust. It's awesome. I use it all the time. Friend of the channel, Chris from Slow Death Games, is a distributor for them. If you live in the US, he's the person I recommend buying it from. As you can see, I glob it on there pretty heavily. I don't even water it down that much some of the time. I used to be very precious about it, but I think I like how the result looks better. Anyways, here's our old friend Vallejo acrylic wash back for another round. I painted the candles of pure Wraithbone first and then started covering them completely and this stuff. The orange and brown mixed together make a really nice natural feeling candle color. And while I was at it, I applied the same texture to the skulls. To create rust stains that are very bright, I mix a little bit of like bright, almost fluorescent orange with white, and you can see that it dries into this like... Why am I panning over here? Oh, I'm about to show you, I see. Yeah, it turns into this like really nice like bright orange effect that if you put a lot of water in, like has super good coverage. It's a little deceptive though. You probably have to put 2 coats on because it dries darker than this, but if you put 2 coats on and just do the same thing again on top, it'll look about like this. Once the wash and the candles was dry, I highlighted all of them with their initial base coat of Wraithbone again, but obviously you want to leave that wash in the recesses. I applied a super bright edge highlight of this bright gold to all the gold areas that we had painted earlier, and an edge highlight of this 10 star silver to the silver. I used some of this Mission Models paint mixed in with the 10 star because the 10 star is pretty thick. I honestly don't really know how I feel about Turbodork paints. I really want to like them, but I feel like whenever I use them, there's like a weird consistency to them, so I found it kind of difficult to do this with them. I painted the eyes of Mithril Silver from the Duncan Rhodes line, which is a bright silver that I like a lot more than the Turbodork one, and then after that, I filled them in with red fluorescent ink. I highlighted a lot of the chip detail with white that was super thinned down. I feel like it's nice if you don't outline outline the entire thing, but just paint like light coming from the top basically, because if this was like actual chip metal, that's probably how it would look. It wouldn't reflect from everywhere. It would just be coming down from like the top. I base coated the mouth in a lot of the areas I wanted to be like glowing bright with white, and then I put the fluorescent ink on after. It's the same one that I used for the eyes. Base coating white makes it pop. It's like super thin, so if you put it over black, you probably won't really see it that much. It needs a bright color underneath and a lot of thin layers in order to look good. Same thing here for the candles. Base coat white, and then I put Imperial Fist contrast on top, followed by what's probably my favorite brand of fluorescent paint that I've used so far, the golden acrylic. I painted this at the very bottom of all the candles, and then a tiny bit at the top right before the yellow. There's so many areas that look great with glow on this model, which is really good for us, because otherwise you'd be kind of just like a dirty silver brown weathered mess. I feel like the main reason this paint scheme works is because there's a lot of bright areas to break up the monotony of the black. Like without that contrast, I just honestly don't think they look that interesting from far away. Anywhere on the model I wanted it to glow, I just did the same process using different amounts of red, orange, or yellow, but the same process of just like layering them and blending until I was happy with them. And then after, I went over with like a dark wash that's like a little bit of silver and mostly water and black paint, and put that over any areas that the glow bled onto, but I didn't want it to do. Instead of freehanding text, I like using just like a little pen. Micron pens are great for this purpose. There's a bunch of different companies that make them. I forget which one this is. I don't know if I'd necessarily recommend it. I feel like the tip wasn't fine enough, and I'd like something with a slightly smaller tip next time. But yeah, I just got a bunch of new pens, so I'm going to experiment with for the rest. So we'll see how that goes after this night. The model's pretty warm as a whole, so I used some Nihilak Oxide, a paint name I had to watch a video just now to know how to pronounce correctly. And use just a tiny bit around a lot of the gold and copper areas to make them look oxidized and have like a blue tone in there. This is something that should be done before priming ideally, but I didn't have these at the time. There's these like little sandbags from Value Gear, which is a great company that gave me these for free. So yeah, they're great. If you want a bunch of little sandbags, I got you covered. They're good sandbag. I applied some Mod Podge and sand just to blend them in with the base a little bit, and then I sprayed them brown with my airbrush. I tried doing the like marble spider webbing technique that a lot of people do for the Aquila. It came out okay. I think because his foot is there, it was like just hard to wrap it. It was a little more subtle than I was hoping for, but because he's going to be weathered so much anyways, it turned out fine. So basically what I did, there's better ways to do this, but what I did is I base coated it silver. I took some makeup removal wipes and just like tore them a bit. Baby wipes work. I feel like just anything with this kind of like texture is going to be fine that you can like break out and make into little webs. I used some Duncan Road Scorched Earth. It's just like a dark brown paint. Dry Dark from GW is pretty similar. And after stretching the makeup wipe over the surface I wanted, although not nearly enough, I think it could have gotten more spiderwebby. You just like spray it, peel it, and then it acts as a stencil and should leave the texture behind of like the spider webbing. I repeated the same process of white and then applied some brown towards the edges of the marble to make it look dirty and like it'd been sitting there for a while. And mostly just because I felt like the marble wasn't noticeable at all, I put some edge highlights of white to help it stand out, and I feel like that helped a lot. I really like how the edge highlights turned out. I feel like if you do the webbing correctly, it's probably not necessary, but for me, it made it a lot easier. Here's all the weathering tools used for the base. It's a variety of oil paints and weathering powders. I feel like just using colors that you want for the weathering powders is all you need to know. This brand no longer exists to my knowledge, RIP Secret Weapon. But the main through line here is that it's all pretty desaturated. You don't want something that's super saturated, otherwise it'll not look that realistic. I think like if you want to do that stylistically, it's fine, but it won't feel like real mud or whatever. And all the candles and bright glowy saturated areas stand out more too. Otherwise they'd be fighting for attention and competing in the same color range. Another really great tool is the Africa Dust Effects by AK. I use this everywhere in my orcs, and it came in handy here too. It's basically like you use it as a wash, but it adds a bright tone, so you're using it to generate like really bright sandy looking areas. And here I'm gonna take some odorless enamel after and just like wipe it off so that it's only in the cracks and it looks like just like dust has settled there. For the puddles, I use this puddle. I use puddles. Puddles, it's what I used. Puddles from AK. You just pour it in there and it dries into a puddle. It's great. It was a little like fully opaque for me, so I ended up putting some like clear resin like water solution on top. And what's important with this stuff is you don't want to go too thick. I think I actually went too thick in this shot, and for the second coat that I did, I made it a lot thinner because it'll crack and like dry weird if you apply too much at once. So yeah, just do like thin little layers and be patient with it. The rest of the base was just applying some leaves leaves and sticking them in a Mod Podge and applying some like muddy spots of like a texture paint. And that was about it.